Spider-Man 2 recently came out, and it is phenomenal. Probably my game of the year. Well, of course, the swinging mechanics and free roam were great, just like the first game, but greatly improved upon. Something I think really stood out were the bosses. They weren't bad in the first game, but it felt like something was missing, and they greatly improved it here. After every boss, I would say, this is my favorite, but then I would fight another and say, well, actually, this is my favorite, because I kept finding things to love about all of them. So we're going to rank all 10 of the main bosses in Spider-Man 2. This is your obvious spoiler warning, since I'll be going in depth with the fights and their context in the story, so if you haven't seen them and don't want to be spoiled, click off the video. Something to mention is that I will only be ranking the bosses with these big health bars on the screen. Not the mini ones like MJ fights in the final mission, the symbiote brute, that won't count. But there's not much else to mention, so let's get right into the rankings. Here at the bottom of the list, I have Mysterio. And I want to preface this by saying that I really like all of these bosses, like I said in the intro, and it was incredibly tough to choose these rankings, but I put Mysterio at the bottom for the following reasons. The fight was honestly pretty basic. Most of the mission was fighting other enemies, and once you actually get to Mysterio, the fight's pretty easy. He has a few annoying attacks, like when he pushes you away with that like sonic blast, but it's not all too difficult, and I do like, some sort of challenge in a boss fight. Something I will say is that the visuals in this fight are fantastic, much like a lot of Mysterio segments throughout the games and movies. Most of it takes place in the snow globe, which is really cool. You can see Mysterio like watching you from the outside, that's great. And then the part where you're flying and swinging upside down with all these buildings coming out at you is also really awesome. So great set pieces and environment, but the actual boss fight, which is obviously the meat and potatoes of what it's supposed to be, was a bit lackluster. So again, I like this, but all the rest of them are a lot better. The next boss that I have is actually the first boss that you face, and that is Sandman. I really like the Sandman fight as it acts as a fantastic opening to the game. You're introduced to all the basic mechanics like swinging, but mainly combat with all the minions. But that's the problem, it's against the minions and not really against Sandman. You fight all his duplicates and save civilians, but during the actual fight, you don't do too much. Most of it is just dodging his projectiles and swinging him back. You can web him up, but the main damage dealer is the Venom for Miles, where after you get him wet, you electrocute him because, science and conducting electricity. But all you really do there is press a button. The fight's fun, and it's a great introduction to the story and everything the game has to offer, but personally for me, it doesn't have enough real interaction with the boss to put it any higher, but I can totally see why another person would put this a lot higher up on their list. This is obviously just my opinion. At number 8, I have Wraith, or Yuri, and something cool about this fight is that it completely surprised me. I knew about most of the bosses prior to facing them because I was unfortunately spoiled, but not this one, so I was excited when I first found out about it. And the fight itself is pretty standard, it doesn't change too much throughout, but it is fairly challenging, and so that kind of makes up for it for me. The fight definitely has that emotion there because you're fighting an old friend, and I actually did die a few times in this fight. For context, I played on Spectacular, so it's not the easiest difficulty, it's not medium, it's just a little, extra kick with more combat, because I like to think I'm somewhat good at this game. And like I was saying earlier, Wraith isn't flashy with any powers or fancy abilities, just a classic opponent with a weapon. She has some distance because of her whip, so you gotta stay safe, and she can't go invisible after I think like phase 1 or 2, so watch out for that. But other than that, fairly simple fight. The environment, though, is great. The burning hospital, which in the mission, you're going there to stop the flame cult. Great environment for this fight. I love it. It's very, not scenic, but it really fits the vibe of it, of everything just kind of crumbling down around you, because it actually, kind of worked out, because that's when, in the story, like, that's when everything was going wrong for Peter. So I don't know, just maybe it's just me being weird, but it just really kind of hit home, I guess, and really fit the theme of where I was in the game. So that was great. So like I said, fun and a bit challenging fight, and really nothing against it. It's just, like I was saying earlier, some great bosses here, and I just don't think I could have put this any higher with the other high quality things we have to talk about. Other than Venom and Kraven, which were shown in the announcement trailer, Lizard was the first villain we saw in actual gameplay back in May. What I consider to be the Lizard boss is the one in the sewer, not the chase one on the river, although the chase through the city does count since it's in between the two phases of the fight. But with all that aside, the fight is pretty similar to Wraith, where Lizard doesn't have many different attacks. He uses his fist, mouth, and tail. He can jump on the walls and leap at you. And the chase scene is pretty fun, with you and him causing major destruction in the city. The arena is okay, sort of bland but not bad. And that's really all I have to say about this fight. And I can't really put into words, I guess. Like, I just liked it. More than the other ones on this list. There was something about it. I thought it was really fun and engaging. I thought it was actually decently challenging. Not too complex, with Lizard being a very straightforward character. There's nothing much to him other than he's, a giant lizard. But I just can't really, honestly can't explain. I just liked it. Just something about it. Maybe it was just because of the little bit of difficulty. I died a few times there, so that may have been it, and it felt rewarding once I finally did it. But I have it here at number 7, which I think is a very solid placement for a fight like this. I was worried that Kraven the Hunter would feel a bit out of place in the urban environment of New York City, but he honestly works great as one of this game's villains. The fight that I have here at number 6 is the one where you play as Peter in the mission. I like this fight because of how unique Kraven is, and he has several different attacks. He can punch you, throw his axe at you, turn invisible, and ambush you and body slam you, which is cool. Summon the robot gods, and snipe you. And the sniping was probably my favorite. He just jumps in a tree and gets out a sniper. I just think that's really cool. And all of this happens while you have to keep the bell from ringing because it messes with the symbiote powers. And the arena is also really fitting to Kraven's theme. It's like a jungle. There's all these trees so he can hide in places, because I lost him a lot, honestly, in this fight, which I shouldn't have, but I kept losing track of him. I also lost a few times to Kraven, but not enough to make me rage. In fact, I died to a lot of these bosses, like I said, but none of them felt too overbearing or difficult, so that was great balancing on the dev's part. Kraven has an especially good balance of being tough at first, but once you really get to know his patterns and what he does, it's a pretty simple fight. This fight is low, not because I don't like it, but because there is a better Kraven fight later on, and you probably already know the one I'm talking about. And I think this one is good, but just not as satisfying as that other one. We are about halfway through the rankings now, so if you're enjoying and you made it this far, it seems like you like my videos, so consider liking and subscribing. It helps me out a ton, and it really motivates me to make more videos like this. Basically, the only things Miles talks about in this game are writing his college essay and finding Martin Lee. The fight that ensues when Miles finally confronts Lee does not disappoint. You can tell the emotional weight of the fight because Miles has been looking for this guy all game to get revenge on what he did to his dad, and this reflects in both their dialogues. When Miles responds to Lee about what he's done and lists all the things that, the bad things that he's done as Mr. Negative, Lee refuses to listen because he doesn't want to be reminded of it. This shows that Lee, is genuinely remorseful about what he did, but he still did it. And it's just cool to fight one of our previous foes from the last game with sort of a new coat of paint. Lee has some new attacks in his arsenal, which switch things up if you think you knew the fight from last time. The locations are also great. The first one is the arena in the mansion where Miles and Lee were kidnapped, and the other one is in the negative realm of Miles' head. I do consider that negative realm to be a part of the fight. Even though you aren't fighting Lee directly, you basically are with all the enemies. Also, watching Miles' friends and family point out his insecurities is sad, but watching him overcome them is astounding, and it just makes you happy that he finally realized who he is and how to balance things out in his life. I really like Lee in this game as a character, especially when him and Miles save Peter towards the end. Even though he should not be forgiven for his actions whatsoever, he committed terrorist attacks. I really like the direction his character was taken in this game, and definitely one of the standouts for me in this game. In the other segment, I said that there was a better form of the Kraven fight, which is true, and that is the Kraven versus Venom fight. It's a lot simpler than the first one. Kraven's arsenal is severely decreased, but you get to play as Venom, and that's just awesome. He's so powerful, and just going around and smashing everything, all the guards earlier, and then getting to fight Kraven as Venom is, oh my god, it was so cool. The whole mission is great, and Venom controls just how you would expect. A big, strong behemoth that destroys anything in his way. The fight is not that challenging, but like I said, you get to play as Venom, and that's why it's so high up here. Really, if this was just if you played as Peter, this may have been number 8, because it's not that complex. But you don't play as Peter, you play as Venom. I've said this like 8 times in this segment, but that's why it's so good. And also the cutscene at the end where Venom eats Kraven's head and kills him is crazy. I did not expect to see that in this game. It's awesome that we got it because we really see, Venom's gruesome side, but I did not expect it whatsoever. Aside from Venom, the only other named symbiote that we see in their true form is Scream, and much like the others, this fight does not disappoint. Scream is actually pretty challenging because she's very sporadic and hostile. She never really calms down, which is why you have to use your environment to stop her, and the neighborhood setting is great. In the first part, when you're outside Peter's house, you can use car alarms to stop her, and it's just also cool to fight in a more suburban area, which you don't see a lot of in this game. And the other part in the construction site is also cool, where you pull down metal pipes to distract her. And the symbiote, dialogue from MJ is very, profound. And it has a very profound message in this whole fight. Because, with the symbiote for Peter, as well as MJ, it sort of brings out the thoughts that you have in the back of your head. And this one shows that MJ is kind of unhappy, and feels like she does a lot of the stuff she does for others and not herself. The newly freed Peter has a new lease on life, and he tries to console her. Once she is saved, they both realize that they need each other and they have to look out for each other. Like I said, this battle is pretty tough because Scream has several phases and can do a decent amount of damage, and the scene before is phenomenal with MJ, Peter, and Harry in the house, because we get to see Venom say his signature line.
We are.
I feel like almost everyone predicted this fight before release. It seemed like the whole lizard chase segment that we saw back in May foreshadowed it, but god damn it, was the Peter versus Miles fight fantastic. It acts as a release of the tension building between the two all game. Miles feels neglected by Peter, even though it's because the symbiote is just bringing out the bad parts of Peter, and he doesn't really think that about Miles. And the fight itself is also fantastic. It's really weird knowing all of Peter's attacks. You're basically fighting yourself because you've played as him. He does the symbiote attacks that you've been using for the past few missions. So this is probably one of the closest things we'll have to fight against you, the player character. And the symbiote suit is very powerful. He deals a lot of damage. The whole basis of this fight is based on the relationship between Peter and Miles, and show that they need to work together as a team to succeed. The symbiote is making Peter feel like all he needed was himself, but Miles and later MJ in the Scream fight show that he was wrong. This fight was very close to being number 1, as I enjoyed it so much. The symbiote covered arena was great, the payoff from everything the game's been building up to was great, and the culmination of Peter and Miles' relationship from the past 3 games was executed perfectly. But there's just one fight that I think is better, and you probably already have it figured out, but I had to put it at number 1. You probably knew going into this that the Venom fight would be at number 1, because who else could it be? To start off, the emotion in this fight is insane. Peter knows that he will either have to kill Harry or come close to doing it to stop Venom, but he doesn't think he can do it. The first half of the fight is Peter versus Venom at the remnants of Midtown High, both of their alma maters, and this is just the perfect place for this section to be. There are 3 parts of the high school that you have to jump through because Venom is very sporadic. You can't stay in the same place for long because he will get you. He has great range. But it feels like a fair fight because of the anti-Venom abilities. It's still hard, no doubt, but just having that, sort of even playing field with your attacks kind of makes things seem like you stand a chance. He also summons the symbiote monsters, which can be pretty annoying. I die a lot to them at random times because they're pretty terrible to deal with. But then once you think you have the upper hand, Venom grows wings and flies over to the Emily May Foundation. When I saw him grow those wings, I lost my mind. It was like the coolest and most terrifying thing I've ever seen. At the Foundation, Miles takes over for the other 2 phases, and I think I liked this part better because it really felt like an uphill battle. Like I said, the anti-Venom with Peter kind of made it seem like they were on an even playing field, but Miles doesn't have that. Watching him hold his own and take on Venom shows how far he's come since first getting bit by that spider back in 2018. And Venom's dialogue here is just great. To Peter, he tries to get him to join him, and with Miles, we see the part of Harry that's jealous of Miles, because he feel like, well, Harry was in that tank, he feels that Miles replaced him as Peter's friend, even though, it's not true. There's room for both. Tony Todd delivers a outstanding performance as Venom. This might be my favorite iteration of the character that we've seen in recent years. He's like a true menace, and I would love to see more of him. And the part after where Miles and Peter are fighting him in the air is just great. Their tag team stuff, it's just, I love this fight so much. Like I said, this game has fantastic bosses, but this Venom fight might be in one of my favorite bosses in gaming of all time. It was that good, and it might just be recency bias, but I absolutely loved it. So, those are my ranking of all 10 Spider-Man 2 bosses. I hope you all enjoyed. If you did, check out one of these videos here, and I'll see you in the next one.